So you probably remember this guy. This the old HP Prebuilt from 2008 that had the, well, we upgraded it to the Q66, I believe it was a Q6600. Yeah, we'll talk about what we've done with it. Okay, so what we actually have done with it, and a couple of videos ago I did explain that we went ahead and swapped it out for a new Ryzen motherboard and processor. We put a 5600G in it. I was debating whether to put a 1650 Super or the 1660 in it to see what kind of graphics and all that stuff and what kind of performance I could get out of it. And I noticed a couple of things, one of them being temperatures. This really did struggle with temps because you can see there's like no room for airflow. My solution at the time was to go ahead and put a fan in the front and go ahead and make sure I had some intake and then let it be able to exhaust with a single fan out of the back. I had to connect it straight to the PSU because the only fan I had at that time that would fit was, it had a Molex connector on it, so I couldn't put it on the motherboard, but that made it sound like a jet airplane trying to take off. It also, there was a little side note to that. It also created quite a bit of heat with the 1650 because there only was probably a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of room. And what I found out was the problem was I was pushing all this air that I was pulling in from the front straight through and straight out the back. It never got a chance to come up here, and the PSU and the GPU were both fighting for what little air they could get, and they were using the graphics card was using the outside of the case as a heat sink, so I couldn't even touch it. It was so hot, and it was loud. So my first thought was, okay, we'll try to swap out fans. When I disconnected the fan, I was trying to find a fan that fit. Did not realize what my airflow problem was at the time. But when I was going ahead and running some tests, I noticed it was a little bit quieter, not much, but a little bit. And the temps were, even though the temperatures on the GPU were still reaching 78, 79, they weren't, it wasn't getting as hot on the side of the case. Still getting warm, but not as hot. So it caused me to realize that, yes, all right, I had an airflow problem, that I had these two things that were trying to take a lot of air and they weren't getting it because I was just pushing straight across. So I went ahead and ran some tests, the benchmarks and everything. First, what I did with the benchmarks is I ran the 5600. I ran the 5600G with no graphics card. I had the GTX1660 in here. I ran it, and then I ran the GTX1650 Super, which does have quite a bit more clearance, and we'll show you that in a few minutes. But it's got more clearance, and I wanted to see if there was a trade-off between the temperatures that I might be getting and the performance. Which one would I be better off trying to stick to, if either one of them at all, or just going with the 5600 and truly making it a sleeper build. Nobody would expect it. So I did. I went ahead and I ran my full benchmark of tests, and one thing I noticed after the swap was the 1650 Super much quieter. In fact, you can't even hear it. So, and at times I've got a small portable fan back behind there that I could hear much louder than this computer, and that wasn't the way it was to begin with. When I first had the fan in the front and the 1660 in here, and even the 1660 by itself with no fan, I could hear the PC much louder than I could hear that little fan back there. But now, I've turned the fan off, but you can't hear that 1650 Super running at all. So was it worth the trade-off? All right, so I've got some charts here, and there was one other thing I noticed when I was trying to run some synthetic benchmarks that we'll talk about near the end of the video. But I went ahead and ran just our normal 4 or 5 benchmarks to take a look and see how these were going to compare and if it was worth the trade-off with the temps. So you'll notice here on these charts, green and gold are going to be the old HP before I made any changes, or actually after I upgraded to the Q6600. The old HP and then the 5600 by itself, and that's just sort of a comparison as to, I'm not going to say apples to apples, but it's comparison to how far the graphics have come on the 5600G as opposed to a 4-core, 4-thread processor running a 1650 Super at that point. And I wanted to compare those. And then the blue and the orange bars are actually comparing with the 5600G, the 1650 Super, and the 1660, and you'll be able to see those. What is not pictured is the marks that I got for 1080 high. 1080p high was a little bit different, and you can see on Shadow of the Tomb Raider here, the low for 1080p, 900p, and 720p were all pretty comparable, with actually the 1650 Super doing better at 720p. The 5600, you can see, edges out that the old configuration, the lower in resolution I go, and that's pretty much to be expected, because the old HP was definitely CPU limited. But I actually did a little bit better off with the 1650 Super at lower resolutions. What is not shown here is a 1080p high, and that was 63 frames per second for the 1650 Super and 69 frames per second for the 1660. Borderlands 3, this is where I got one of my two highest temperatures. For Borderlands 3 and Dirt 5, it was around 78, 79 degrees. Again, after I took the fan out, much cooler on the side, but still pretty warm. And you can see again, I was CPU limited with the old HP setup. The 5600 did much better, but the 1650 Super and the 1660 pretty much neck and neck. And the 1650 actually did a little bit better at lower resolutions. Again, I'm not going to be running them at lower resolutions, but the 1080p high for the 1650 Super was 54 frames per second as opposed to 57 for the 1660. So it just a little bit better, but again, we're talking about that 60 frames per second right in that area, so it might not even be noticeable. Dirt 5, again, it's one of those that you can see that the CPU, the old configuration, really held it back. Predictably, the 5600 did better again, and in this case, the 1660 did better than the 1650 Super, but it did run warmer. This is, like I said, was one of the ones I got the hotter temperatures. 57.7 at 1080p high for the 1650 Super, and I did make that magical 60 frames per second, getting 61.6 1080p high on the 1660. Far Cry 5, much the same story. It's again, the old HP, predictably, the 5600 better it gets at the lower resolutions, and neck and neck pretty much with the 1650 and the 1660. What is not shown is how close that the 1080p high scores were. It was 75 for the 1650 Super, 78 for the 1660. So again, pretty close, and the temperature trade-off is pretty close as well. Again, the 1650 Super, I didn't have any problems putting my hand on the side of the panel here. It was pretty cool to the touch. I'm not going to say cold to the touch. You could tell it was a little bit warmer than the rest of it, but the vents on the side here, when it was pulling air, both GPUs were able to pull air through the sides, making it much cooler than the top of the case. But again, wasn't nearly as hot, didn't make nearly as much noise when I was testing. Counter-Strike Global Offensive, CSGO will run on a paperclip, duct tape, and a rubber band around it. It'll run on just about anything, give you, at least 60 frames per second. And the same here. It gave me almost 100 frames per second with both the old HP and the new 5600 setup. And you can see that there's a difference of about 10% or so with and these are on 1080p high. So there's about a 10% difference between 327 and I believe it was 291 on the 1650 Super. But I'm playing on a 1080p monitor, unless I'm going really high refresh rate like 360, never going to notice that difference, and I probably won't notice that difference anyway. Not going to notice it on a 60 frames per second monitor, or 120, 144, or 240. It's just, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, that small amount of difference, or that small amount of frame rate, that frames per second, and again, the temperature, the trade-off here for the temps. The weird thing that I noticed when I was trying to run the synthetic benchmarks, I could not get into TimeSpy or Firestrike because they're part of that 3D Mark suite. And 3D Mark, when I tried to turn it on and try to initialize it, it hung at that initialization, or that splash screen. Come to find out, it's a setting in Windows under the security, specifically under the ransomware settings. There's a ransomware protection setting. You have to actually go to the ransomware protection screen and turn off controlled folder access to be able to go back and run this. Now I found this, I don't even remember where I found it online. It was in the one of the help things somewhere, or I don't remember if I found it on Reddit or not. I think I found it in one of the help threads. But you have to actually turn that off so that it has access to be able to tell what's in your system. And so it can go ahead and give you reports and stuff like that. After that, I tried to run it again. It gave me one other warning trying to tell me that the ransomware was trying to prevent it. I told it no. I turned it back off again, and I reran it, and everything came up. Now I'm not including those synthetics in these charts. It was anywhere from about 5 to 10% difference. I kind of expected that with the 5600G as opposed to the 3600X. That was mainly when I was just kind of checking out the CPUs, and I did find that when I ran the 4600G and the 3600X, they were comparable, and the 4600G was a little bit better in some cases. So I decided not to post those or make charts for those here, but it was something that I wanted to run, and I was very frustrated and just kind of wanted to pass that along to you guys. If you're trying to run a 3D Mark, Windows has made some changes where you might have to deal with the ransomware protection now to go in there and switch that off. Don't know what it's going to mean for everybody in the long run. Don't know if 3D Mark's going to make changes to get to adjust to that, whatever the case is, but that's what I found, so I went ahead and shared that with you guys. Anyway, all in all, at the end of the day, the 1660 Super, even though it did do better pretty much across the board and did do very well in the higher frame rates or the higher resolutions, did cause me too much heat, did cause me too much noise, and it was a little bit too warm to the touch as opposed to the 1650 Super, which is in there now. I only had that, like I said, that little bit of room. So take a look at it now. You can see the 1650 Super. I've got quite a bit more room, probably about 2 fingers width of room, where I only had just a little bit, maybe a little over a centimeter room, or about a ½ inch or so with the 1660. I've now got quite a bit. There is more of an opportunity to get some airflow in there. Still not going to put the fan back in the front. It was just too loud, but now, I mean, it's whisper quiet. Even under load, it's very quiet. And even though the 1650 Super and the 1660 both got up to about 78, 79 degrees, this was much quieter, much cooler to the touch on the side of on the computer. So that's what I'm going to stick with. I will use the 1660 in something else, I'm sure. I will get around to it. Maybe I'll go back and I'll rebuild Danny D, which is my the small transportable that I usually use when I go on the road, LAN parties, editing on the road or anything like that. But this turned out to be a pretty good build. And like I said, I can't complain, and the 1650 Super is what's going to stay in here if I don't just completely take it out and use the 5600G, because if I'm not playing games, that 5600G, it works great. It's awesome. It's more than enough to handle just everyday tasks and even some light editing and stuff like that. So anyway, that's all I got for right now. I just want to share that experience with you and share what I found out so far, why I chose what I did, why I've done what I did, and kind of the difference between that 1650 and that 1660. And I know graphics cards are really, really hard to get right now, but both of those are actually really capable cards. You shouldn't have any kind of issue if that's what you have to settle for, but please do try to get it at a good price. Don't be spending a whole, crap ton of money on something that just, it's 2 or 3 or was it 3 or 4 years old? Yeah, don't do it. Anyway, that's all I got for right now. If you found the video enjoyable or it helped you at all, go ahead and throw a thumbs up on it and give me a like. If you didn't, that's okay. You can throw a dislike, but let me know why so I can fix it later. Feel free to leave comments. The comments are always welcome. I always enjoy responding to them. And don't be afraid to visit me on those socials. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. I'm trying to hit 500 by the end of the year so I can get on some of the affiliate programs and all that stuff. And that benefits me, that benefits you. Hopefully it benefits everybody, but I can't do anything about it if I can't get there. So if you guys haven't already subscribed, please do. I'm still going to tinker around with this a little bit. I don't know what other else I've got going on. I still got the Dell Optiplex I'm playing around with too. So I'm tweaking on that. Not tweaking, that sounds bad. I'm messing around with that so I can fix it and do better with that one. So we'll get back to it too. But in the meantime, folks, that's all I got for this time. So I'll see you later.